In the early 1980s, wealthy people started trooping into a fancy hotel in London, hoping to meet a man who promised them huge riches. He was no other than Dr. John Ackah Blay-Miezah. He arrived in a grey Rolls Royce driven by a chauffeur. He wore expensive suits, smoked cigars, and his hands glittered with rings. This made him look impressive, but it wasn't just his appearance that charmed the investors. Blay-Miezah also told them incredible stories. He said he had studied at the famous University of Pennsylvania in the United States and even sang their fight song to prove it. But what really excited the investors was his claim that he could unlock a fortune hidden in Swiss bank vaults. This money, he said, came from his close friend Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president after independence. One of these investors was American lawyer named Barry Ginsberg. He initially gave Blay $5,000, believing that he would get back 10 times that amount. When he didn't see any returns, he didn't stop. In fact, he even invested more and convinced his friends, family, and co-workers to do the same. Over time, Ginsberg even helped Blay-Miezah pay for his luxurious lifestyle, hoping that the big payday would come soon. After waiting several days, Ginsberg was finally taken into a dim room filled with the smell of incense and the sound of classical music. When he asked Blay-Miezah when the money would arrive, Blay-Miezah would put his arm around him and said, "Soon, Brother Ginsberg, very soon." But that promised money never came. The so-called Oman Ghana Trust Fund, which Blay-Miezah claimed contained the wealth Nkrumah had hidden away before being overthrown, was nothing but a lie. In reality, there was no gold hidden in Swiss banks, and Nkrumah hadn't given any riches to Blay-Miezah. In fact, even Blay-Miezah's name and title were fake. He hadn't studied at the University of Pennsylvania, and he hadn't been by Nkrumah's side when he was president. Still, Blay-Miezah managed to keep fooling investors for years with his charm and confidence. John Ackah Blay-Miezah, whose real name was John Colora Blay, didn't come from wealth. He grew up poor in Ghana, earning the nickname Kerosene Boy because he sold fuel to pay for his education. As he grew older, he used his charm and cleverness to rise above his humble beginnings. Eventually, he convinced the military leader of Ghana, Ignatius Kutu Achampon, to give him a diplomatic passport. With this passport, Blay-Miezah claimed he could recover the country's stolen wealth from Swiss banks. This was the start of nearly 2 decades of lying, tricking people and avoiding punishment. He survived military coups, court trials, jail time, and more, all while continuing to fool people. At the heart of Blay-Miezah's con was a simple but effective trick. He promised his investors huge amounts of money, but kept delaying when they would receive it. People like Ginsberg were told they would get $52 million, then $150 million, but they had to wait just a little longer. Blay-Miezah would hand out promissory notes, which are documents that promise to pay someone in the future, and set up meetings in luxurious places like the Austrian Alps or the Caribbean. But just when it seemed like the investors would get their money, another problem would come up, and Blay-Miezah would have to leave quickly to fix things. When the strategy didn't work, Blay-Miezah would pretend to be sick, a trick he learned early in his criminal career. Even though Blay-Miezah kept changing his story and making excuses, many of his investors didn't give up. Some lost everything they had, including the owner of Ghana's first local brewery, a man who had made his fortune from scratch. Blay-Miezah had some powerful allies too. One of them was John Mitchell, the former U.S. Attorney General who was involved in the Watergate scandal. Mitchell, hoping to get $733 million, trusted Blay-Miezah and lent his name to the scheme, which helped reassure other investors. Not everyone was fooled though. One person who saw through Blay-Miezah's lies was Shirley Temple Black, the former child movie star who was serving as the US ambassador to Ghana. She wasn't taken in by his stories. His wife Gladys was also a sharp woman. She was nicknamed Colombo because she was so good at finding out Blay-Miezah's affairs with other women and confronting him about them. Blay-Miezah's story is one of the bold lies and deceit set in the backdrop of post-colonial Ghana. He presented himself as a hero, a man who would recover Ghana's lost wealth and use it to rebuild the country. But in reality, he was using people's money to fund his extravagant lifestyle, staying in penthouses, eating gourmet meals prepared by private chefs, and traveling the world. Even as his scheme began to fall apart, Blay-Miezah decided to run for president of Ghana. He claimed to be an anti-corruption candidate, hoping to protect himself from being caught as a fraud. The book Anansi's Gold by Ackah Blay-Miezah tells the fascinating story of how Blay-Miezah used greed and desperation to keep his con going. Even though his lies were ridiculous, such as the idea that Nkrumah had given away thousands of gold bars and entrusted them to a teenager, his victims continued to believe him. They were so invested in the story that they refused to see the truth, much like followers of a doomsday cult who continued to believe in their leader even when the predicted apocalypse never happens. Blay-Miezah's story eventually ended in tragedy. He died just as his empire of lies was starting to collapse. Investigative journalists in the United States exposed his scam, and an official inquiry found no evidence that Nkrumah had ever hidden away any gold. But despite all this, the myth of Blay-Miezah's fortune still lives on today. In the book, Yibo draws a comparison between Blay-Miezah's actions and the way the imperial powers exploited countries like Ghana. These powers looted nations, leaving behind little but shattered dreams. One investigator even said, if you wanted to launder money, you did it through London. In many ways, Blay-Miezah's scam was a reflection of the exploitation that had plagued Ghana and other former colonies for years. Even after his death, Blay-Miezah's legacy lived on. Some of his victims, even though they lost everything, continued to believe in his cause. They convinced themselves that he had been on the verge of delivering the incredible wealth he had promised. The story shows the power of hope and how it can be manipulated by people with the confidence and charm to tell a good story.